The dust on her boots had turned to mud from tears by the time she reached the edge of the world. And Owen Lancaster saw her from 100 yards away, his heart stopping cold in his chest as he recognized the deliberate way she placed one foot in front of the other toward that sharp drop, where the canyon opened up like a hungry mouth. He kicked his horse hard, the stallion surging forward across the Colorado plain as the afternoon sun beat down merciless on Greeley's outskirts. The year was 1878, and Owen had seen plenty of darkness in his 32 years, enough to recognize it in someone else even from a distance. The woman wore a faded blue dress that had once been fine, her dark hair hanging loose down her back, and she moved like a ghost, like someone already gone from this world. "Stop!" His voice tore across the distance, rough and desperate. "Miss, stop right there." She did not pause, did not turn, and panic seized him as he closed the gap between them. He could see the cliff edge now, the way the ground just ended and fell away into nothing, rock and sky, and a drop that would kill anyone who went over. Owen threw himself from his horse while it was still moving, his boots hitting hard ground, and he ran the last 20 feet with his heart hammering against his ribs. Delilah. He did not know her name, had never seen her before in his life, but the word came out anyway, any name to make her human, to pull her back from wherever she had gone inside herself. Delilah Warren, stop. Her foot paused 6 inches from the edge. Owen saw her shoulders stiffen, saw the smallest tremor run through her frame, and he stopped running, forcing himself to go still even though every instinct screamed at him to grab her and pull her back to safety. "That is not my name," she said, and her voice was hollow, scraped clean of feeling. "I know," Owen said quietly, his hands raised like he was calming a spooked horse. "I know it is not, but I needed you to stop and you did. That means something. It means nothing." But she had not moved closer to the edge, had not taken that final step, and Owen took that as permission to edge slightly nearer, close enough now to see her profile, the way her eyes stared straight ahead at the empty air beyond the cliff. "My name is Owen Lancaster," he said, keeping his voice level, conversational almost. "I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here. Been out checking on some strays that wandered off. Was planning to head back to town for supplies before sundown." She said nothing, but he saw her chest rise and fall with breath, and that was enough. "What is your real name?" he asked. For a long moment he thought she would not answer. The wind picked up around them, hot and dry, carrying the smell of sage and dust. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Daisy Warren." "Miss Warren," Owen said, taking one careful step closer. "I do not know what brought you out here. I do not know what you have seen or what you have lost. But I know that whatever it is, it does not have to end like this." "You know nothing." Her voice cracked on the last word, the first hint of real emotion bleeding through. "You know nothing about what I have lost, about what was taken." "Then tell me," Owen said. He was close enough now that he could reach out and touch her if he wanted, but he kept his hands at his sides, unthreatening. "Tell me what happened." Daisy turned then, finally, and Owen felt something shift in his chest at the sight of her face. She was young, maybe 24 or 25, with fine features and eyes that might have been bright once, but now looked like someone had blown out a candle behind them. Tear tracks cut through the dust on her cheeks, and there was a bruise, fading to yellow-green, along her jawline. "Why?" she asked, and it was not hostile, just genuinely confused. "Why would you care? You do not know me." "Because I am standing here," Owen said simply. "Because I saw you walking toward this cliff and I could not just ride away. Because something in me knew I was supposed to call out to stop you, even if I do not understand why yet." Daisy's face crumpled, and she swayed on her feet. Owen moved without thinking, catching her arm and pulling her back from the edge, away from the drop, and she did not resist. She collapsed against him and he held her while she sobbed, great wrenching sounds that seemed to tear up from somewhere deep inside her. He said nothing, just let her cry, one hand awkward on her back, the other steadying her. His horse wandered over and nuzzled at his shoulder, and the sun continued its arc across the sky. And Owen Lancaster held a stranger and wondered what force in the universe had sent him down this particular path today, instead of any other. When the tears finally subsided, Daisy pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands. She would not meet his eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have. Do not apologize," Owen said firmly. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders even though it was warm. "It just seemed like the thing to do. Come back to town with me. Let me buy you a meal at least, and then you can tell me what brought you out here if you want, or you do not have to tell me anything at all, but either way you should not be alone right now." Daisy looked up at him then, really looked at him, and Owen saw her taking in his weathered face, the lines around his eyes from squinting into too many sunsets, the dust on his clothes and the honest concern in his expression. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "all right." Owen helped her up onto his horse and swung up behind her, and they rode back toward Greeley in silence, her body tense in front of him, his mind racing with questions he did not yet have the right to ask. The town came into view as the sun started to dip, buildings casting long shadows across the main street, and Owen guided the horse toward the hotel that had a dining room attached. He helped Daisy down, and she stood there looking lost, so he offered his arm, and after a moment she took it. Inside the dining room it was cooler, and the owner's wife brought them coffee and stew without being asked, the way she did for anyone who looked like they needed it. Owen sat across from Daisy and watched her wrap her hands around the coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "I came here 3 months ago," Daisy said suddenly, her voice low. "From Philadelphia. My father had died and my mother 2 years before that, and there was nothing left for me there but debts and memories. I had received a letter from a man named Charles Winters. He owned a shop here in Greeley, and we had been corresponding for nearly a year. He asked me to come west, said he wanted to marry me to build a life together." Owen felt a cold, understanding start to settle in his gut, but he said nothing, just waited. When I arrived, he was everything he had promised to be in his letters: kind, attentive, respectful. We were married within 2 weeks. Daisy's hands tightened on the cup. The night of our wedding, everything changed. He was not the man he had pretended to be. He was cruel, violent. He kept me locked in the rooms above the shop, barely let me out. When I tried to leave, she stopped, and Owen saw her jaw clench, saw the way her whole body went rigid with the memory. 2 days ago there was a fight, an accident. He fell down the stairs and broke his neck. Daisy's eyes were dry now, but her voice shook. I should have felt something, relief maybe, or guilt or grief, but I felt nothing at all, just empty. The doctor came and the sheriff came, and they said it was a terrible accident, that I was a poor widow now, and all I could think was that I had come all this way, left everything I knew for this. To be trapped and hurt and then left with nothing, not even the ability to feel any more. "So you walked out to that cliff," Owen said quietly. Daisy nodded. "I walked out there and I thought maybe if I just stopped, if I just stepped off, it would not hurt anymore. Nothing would hurt anymore." Owen reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. It was forward, presumptuous even, but he did it anyway. "I am glad I found you," he said. "I am glad you stopped." She looked at their hands, his sun browned and calloused, hers pale and small beneath it. "I do not know what to do now," she whispered. "I have no money." The shop was rented and everything in it belonged to creditors. I have nothing. You have your life, Owen said. That is something. That is everything. Daisy's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. Is it? I do not even know what to do with it. Owen thought about that. About the ranch he ran with just himself and 2 hired hands. About the empty house that had once belonged to his parents. About the way his life had become just work and sleep and more work. Nothing to break the monotony except the occasional trip to town. He thought about the way something in his chest had cracked open when he had seen this woman walking toward her death. The way holding her while she cried had felt like the first real thing he had done in years. The hotel owner's wife, Mrs. Gardner. She is always looking for help, he said. Room and board plus a small wage. It is not much, but it would be a start. And my ranch, I come to town every week for supplies. I could check on you, make sure you are managing all right. Daisy studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You do not owe me anything. Maybe not, Owen agreed. But I called your name out there even though I did not know it. I called you back from the edge. That makes you my responsibility now, at least until you are steady on your feet again. You called me Delilah, Daisy said, and there was the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement in her voice. I panicked, Owen admitted. It was the first name that came to mind. It is a nice name, Daisy said softly, then even softer. Thank you for panicking. For calling me back. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and Owen spoke with Mrs. Gardner, who took one look at Daisy's hollow eyes and agreed immediately to take her on. By the time the lamps were being lit up and down the street, Daisy had a room on the 2nd floor of the hotel and a job starting the next morning. Owen stood with her on the hotel porch, his hat in his hands, the night air cooling around them. I will come by next week, he said. If that is all right with you. Daisy nodded. She had not let go of his jacket, still wore it over her shoulders despite the warmth. Next week, she agreed. He rode out of Greeley as the stars began to appear overhead, and the whole way back to his ranch, he thought about empty eyes and cliff edges, and the way a single moment could change the entire direction of a life. True to his word, Owen returned to Greeley the following Saturday. He found Daisy in the hotel dining room, wiping down tables, and the difference in her was subtle but there. She still looked tired, still moved with a careful precision like someone nursing an injury, but there was color in her cheeks, and when she saw him her expression shifted into something that might have been pleasure. Mr. Lancaster, she said, and it sounded almost like a question. Miss Warren, he replied. I was hoping you might have some time to talk. Maybe take a walk. She glanced at Mrs. Gardner, who waved her off with a knowing smile, and then Daisy untied her apron and joined him outside. They walked along the main street, past the general store and the church and the blacksmith shop where the ring of hammer on metal echoed out into the evening. How has the week been? Owen asked. Strange, Daisy admitted. Good, I think, but strange. Mrs. Gardner is very kind. The work is not difficult, but I keep waiting for something terrible to happen, for it all to fall apart. That feeling will fade, Owen said. It just takes time. How do you know? He was quiet for a moment then. My parents died when I was 20. Cholera took half the town that year. I was left with the ranch and no idea how to run it, and for months I kept expecting to fail, to lose everything they had built. But I did not. I learned. I kept going, and eventually that feeling of waiting for disaster, it went away. Daisy looked at him with new understanding. You were alone. For a long time, yes, Owen said. I have good hands working for me now, Pete and Charlie, they are solid men. But the house is still empty most evenings. It is a different kind of loneliness. They had reached the edge of town without realizing it, and by unspoken agreement, they turned back, retracing their steps. The conversation drifted to easier things, to the way Greeley was growing with the railroad coming through, to the wildflowers that would bloom in the spring, to small, safe topics that did not require either of them to reveal too much. But when Owen said goodbye and rode back toward his ranch, he felt something warm settling in his chest, and he knew he would be counting the days until he could return. The visits became routine. Every Saturday, Owen would come to town, and he and Daisy would walk together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in each other's presence. She told him about Philadelphia, about growing up in a city so different from this wide open country. He told her about the ranch, about the satisfaction of watching calves grow strong, about the way the land changed with the seasons. Slowly, carefully, Daisy began to come back to herself. The emptiness in her eyes filled in with something like hope, and she smiled more easily, laughed at Owen's dry observations about the people who passed them on the street. He found himself looking forward to Saturdays with an anticipation he had not felt in years, found himself thinking about her at odd moments while he was working, wondering what she was doing, if she was happy. It was 2 months after that day at the cliff when things shifted between them. They had walked out past the edge of town to where the grassland stretched away toward the mountains, and Daisy had stopped to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "It is beautiful here," she said quietly. "I did not see it before, but I do now." "What changed?" Owen asked, though he thought he might already know the answer. Daisy turned to look at him, and there was something vulnerable and brave in her expression. "You changed it," she said. "You gave me a reason to see it, to see anything at all." Owen felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. "Daisy, I know it has not been very long," she interrupted, speaking quickly now like she was afraid she would lose her courage. "I know I am probably not in any state to be thinking about these things. But I need to tell you that these Saturdays, these walks with you, they have become the best part of my life. You make me feel like myself again, like I might actually have a future worth living." He took a step closer to her, closing the distance between them. "You do have a future," he said. "And if you will let me, I would like to be part of it." Owen, he cupped her face gently in his hand, his thumb brushing over the place where the bruise had been long since faded. "I am not saying we need to rush anything. I know you need time. But I need you to know that when I see you, I see someone strong and brave and beautiful. I see someone worth knowing, worth caring about. And I think maybe I am falling in love with you, Daisy Warren." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and when she opened them again they were bright with tears. But these were different from the ones she had shed that first day. These were not tears of despair, but of something warmer, softer. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." "I know," Owen said, "but we can be terrified together. That makes it easier." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a question and a promise all at once. She kissed him back with a hesitancy that gradually melted into certainty, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. They stood there as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared, and Owen thought about fate and timing, and the strange paths that led people to exactly where they needed to be. Over the next several months, their relationship deepened and grew. Owen introduced Daisy to Pete and Charlie, who treated her with easy respect and teased Owen mercilessly about being sweet on the pretty hotel worker. Daisy met Owen's friends in town, was welcomed into the community as more than just Charles Winters's tragic widow, more than the woman from back east who did not belong. She began to belong. Owen started staying in town on Saturday nights, taking a room at the hotel so he could spend Sunday morning with Daisy before heading back to the ranch. They would have breakfast together, and then walk to church, And afterward, they would sit on the hotel porch and talk about everything and nothing. Mrs. Gardner watched them with approval, and half the town started placing bets on when Owen would finally propose. It was spring when he asked her. He had brought her out to the ranch for the first time, wanting her to see the place that meant so much to him, the land he had worked so hard to keep. They rode out across the property, past cattle grazing in green fields, past the creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains, and Owen showed her everything, his voice proud and a little nervous. "What do you think?" he asked as they stood on a rise overlooking the main house and the barn and the corral. "I think it is perfect," Daisy said honestly. The wind tugged at her hair, and she had to hold her hat on with one hand. "I think you have built something really good here." "I want to build more," Owen said. He dismounted and helped her down, and then he took both her hands in his. "I want to build a life here, Daisy. With you. I know we have only known each other for 8 months, and I know you have been through hell, but I also know that I love you. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I know that I want children with you, a family, a future. So I am asking, Daisy Warren, will you marry me?" Daisy's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling wide and bright. "Yes," she said, and then louder, more certain. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and when he set her down, he kissed her with all the love and joy and relief flooding through him. She kissed him back just as fiercely, and it was a promise, a beginning, the start of something neither of them had thought they would find. They were married in June, in the little church in Greeley with half the town in attendance. Daisy wore a dress that Mrs. Gardner had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she looked more beautiful than Owen had ever seen her. He stood at the altar in his best suit, scrubbed clean and nervous, and when Daisy walked down the aisle toward him, he felt emotion close up his throat. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed Daisy like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, because in that moment she was. The reception was held in the hotel dining room, with food and music and dancing that went on into the night. Owen was not much of a dancer, but he waltzed with his new wife and tried not to step on her feet too often, and Daisy laughed against his shoulder and told him he was doing fine. As the celebration wound down and the guests began to drift away, Owen and Daisy slipped out to the porch, stealing a moment alone together. The night was warm and clear, stars scattered thick across the sky, and Owen pulled Daisy close and just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Daisy pulled back enough to look up at him, and her smile was radiant. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be," she said. "You saved my life, Owen. You gave me a reason to keep living, and now you have given me a reason to love living." "You saved me too," Owen said. "I did not even realize how alone I was until I met you, how much I was just going through the motions. You changed everything." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and then Owen took his wife home to the ranch, to the house he had prepared for her, to the bed they would share and the life they would build together. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Daisy had to adjust to ranch life, to the isolation and the hard work, to being miles from town and other people. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when she missed the bustle of Philadelphia or even the constant activity of the hotel. But Owen was patient with her, and she learned to love the quiet, the space, the way the land seemed to stretch on forever. She learned to ride well, to help with the cattle, to manage the household accounts and garden and all the 100 tasks that came with being a rancher's wife. Pete and Charlie treated her like a sister, and she cooked for all of them, filling the house with warmth and laughter and the smell of fresh bread. And at night, when the work was done and they were alone together, Daisy and Owen would talk for hours, sharing dreams and fears and hopes, building a foundation of trust and intimacy that went deeper than passion, though they had that too. Owen was gentle with her, mindful of her past, and she loved him fiercely for it, for the way he made her feel safe and cherished and free. By their first anniversary, Daisy was pregnant. She told Owen over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction, and he went very still for a moment before a grin spread across his features, so wide it looked like it might split his face in half. "Really?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Really," Daisy confirmed, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Owen was beside himself with excitement and worry in equal measure. He fussed over Daisy constantly, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup, until she finally sat him down and told him firmly that she was pregnant, not fragile, and he needed to let her live her life. But his concern came from love, and she could not really be angry with him for it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Daisy's belly grew round with their child, Owen found himself overwhelmed by how much his life had changed in just 2 years. He thought sometimes about that day at the cliff, about how close he had come to never knowing this woman, to never having this future, and it made him hold her a little tighter, love her a little fiercer. Their son was born in February of 1880, in the middle of a snowstorm that made it impossible for the doctor to reach them from town. Mrs. Gardner had come out to stay with them for the last few weeks of Daisy's pregnancy, and she delivered the baby with Pete boiling water and Charlie pacing anxiously in the barn, because he could not stand to be in the house listening to Daisy's pain. Owen stayed by his wife's side through all of it, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when their son finally arrived, small and red and screaming his displeasure at the world, Owen wept openly. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with tears as Daisy placed the baby in his arms. "Daisy, he is perfect." "Of course he is," Daisy said, exhausted but smiling. "He is ours." They named him Thomas after Owen's father, and he became the center of their world. Owen took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, learning to change diapers and rock the baby to sleep, and make ridiculous faces to coax out smiles. Daisy watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, deeper and more completely than she had thought possible. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full and occasionally exhausting. Thomas grew strong and healthy, hitting every milestone right on schedule, and by the time he was a year old he was toddling around the ranch getting into everything, his curiosity boundless. When Thomas was 2, Daisy found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Owen worried himself sick over her, but Daisy weathered it with characteristic determination, and by the time summer arrived, she was feeling better. Their daughter was born in October of 1882, and she was tiny and perfect with Daisy's dark hair and Owen's gray eyes. They named her Sarah, and if Owen had thought he was smitten with Thomas, it was nothing compared to how thoroughly his daughter wrapped him around her little finger from day one. "You are going to spoil her rotten," Daisy accused, watching Owen rock the baby and sing to her in a low, rumbling voice that was surprisingly sweet. "Absolutely," Owen agreed without a hint of shame. "That is my right as her father." Daisy just laughed and shook her head, and thought about how impossibly far she had come from that day at the cliff, from those empty eyes and hollow heart. Now her life was so full it sometimes felt like it might burst, full of love and laughter and purpose. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and asked 1,000 questions about everything. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak a mile wide that she had definitely inherited from both her parents. The ranch prospered, growing as Owen bought additional land and expanded the herd, and Daisy managed the household with efficiency and grace. They added on to the house, building more rooms to accommodate their growing family, and Daisy filled it with curtains she sewed herself and furniture they ordered from catalogs, making it truly feel like a home. On Sundays, they would still go to church in Greeley, and afterward they would often have lunch at the hotel, where Mrs. Gardner would exclaim over how big the children had gotten and slip them cookies when she thought no one was looking. When Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, Daisy got pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was easy, almost effortless, and Daisy joked that her body had finally figured out what it was doing. Their second son, James, was born in April of 1885, and he was laid back from the start, content to eat and sleep and gurgle happily at anyone who paid him attention. With 3 children, life became wonderfully chaotic. The house was never quiet, never still, always full of noise and motion and life. Owen and Daisy worked as a team, dividing responsibilities and supporting each other through the exhausting early years of parenthood, and their partnership grew stronger with every challenge they faced together. Thomas started school when he was 6, riding into town each day with his father when Owen went to check on things, and Owen would pick him up in the afternoon. Sarah would cry at being left behind, already counting the days until she was old enough to join her brother, and Daisy would distract her with lessons of her own, teaching her letters and numbers at the kitchen table while James napped. Owen taught Thomas to ride properly, to work with cattle, to understand the land and respect it. He taught Sarah too, because she demanded to learn everything her brother learned, and he found he loved having his daughter ride beside him, pointing out birds and asking questions about the cattle. Daisy taught all of them to read, filling the house with books ordered from back east, and in the evenings they would gather in the parlor and she would read aloud while Owen whittled and the children played quietly. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and it was good. On their 10th anniversary, Owen took Daisy back to the cliff. It was the first time either of them had returned since that day, and as they stood at the edge looking out over the canyon, Daisy felt like she was looking at a different person, a different life. "I do not even recognize who I was then," she said quietly, her hand in Owen's. "That woman who walked out here ready to end everything, I cannot imagine feeling that empty now." "You are not her anymore," Owen said. "You have not been her for a long time." "Because of you," Daisy said, turning to face him. "You called my name, Owen. You gave me a reason, and then you gave me 1,000 more reasons every single day." Owen pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You gave me reasons too," he said. "You took a life that was just existing and turned it into something worth living. You gave me love and family and a future I never dared to dream about." They stood there together as the sun moved across the sky, and when they finally turned away from the cliff to head back to the ranch, to their children and their life, they walked hand in hand, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. The children continued to grow. Thomas developed a love for working with the cattle that matched his father's, and it was clear he would take over the ranch one day. Sarah surprised everyone by showing a talent for training horses, and by the time she was 10, she could gentle the wildest Mustang with patience and skill. James was the dreamer, always off somewhere with a book or staring at clouds, and Daisy recognized something of herself in him, that need for quiet and space to think. When Thomas was 13, Daisy miscarried a baby she had not even known she was carrying. It hit her harder than she expected, and for a few days she found herself sinking into a darkness that felt frighteningly familiar. But Owen was there, holding her through it, and so were the children, Thomas and Sarah tiptoeing around trying to be helpful and James crawling into her lap to give her fierce hugs. "I am all right," she told Owen one night as they lay in bed, his arm around her. "I am sad, but I am all right. I am not that woman at the cliff. I will never be her again." "I know," Owen said, "but if you ever need me, if you ever feel yourself slipping, you tell me. You do not carry things alone anymore." "I will," Daisy promised, and she meant it. A year later, Daisy was pregnant again, and this time she carried to term without complications. Their fourth child, another daughter they named Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 1892, and she completed their family in a way none of them had known was missing. With nearly 10 years between Elizabeth and James, the older children doted on the baby, and she grew up surrounded by love from all sides. Greeley continued to grow and change around them, the railroad bringing more people and more opportunities, the town expanding from a small settlement to something that could almost be called a city. But the ranch remained constant, a steady anchor in a changing world, and Owen and Daisy raised their children there with values of hard work, honesty, and kindness. As the century drew to a close, Owen and Daisy found themselves in their 40s with a family that had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Thomas was 20, already running most of the ranch operations and courting a nice girl from town. Sarah was 18, beautiful and independent, and showing no signs of settling down anytime soon, much to the frustration of several young men who tried to win her attention. James was 15, talking about maybe becoming a teacher, and Elizabeth was 8, still young enough to believe her parents could do anything. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their customary end to each day, Daisy leaned her head on Owen's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, his arm coming around her automatically. "Everything," Daisy said. "About how far we have come. About that day at the cliff and how it feels like a lifetime ago. About how lucky I am." "We both are," Owen said. "I think about that day too, you know. About what would have happened if I had taken a different path home, if I had been 5 minutes later, if I had not called out to you. I think about how I almost missed all of this." "But you did not," Daisy said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. You called my name and gave me a reason to stop, to turn around, to live. And then you kept giving me reasons, every single day since." "You did the same for me," Owen said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions. You gave my life meaning, purpose, joy. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house they could hear their children, Thomas's deep voice and Sarah's laugh and James reading something to Elizabeth, and it was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. "You ever regret it?" Daisy asked suddenly. "Stopping that day, taking on a broken stranger?" Owen turned to look at her, and in the fading light she could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Never," he said. "Not for one single moment. You were never broken, Daisy. You were hurting, you were lost, but you were never broken, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Daisy felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from being overwhelmed by love. She had cried so many tears in her life, tears of despair and pain and loss, but these were different. These were tears of gratitude, of joy, of a happiness so deep and complete it had no other way to express itself. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them all those years ago. "I love you so much, Owen Lancaster." "I love you too," Owen replied, kissing her softly. "Always have, always will." They stayed on the porch until the sky was fully dark, and the children called them in for dinner. And as they stood and walked hand in hand toward the light and warmth of their home, Daisy thought about second chances and the power of a single moment to change everything. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons and life. Thomas married his sweetheart, a woman named Anna, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property, staying close to family. Within 2 years, they had given Owen and Daisy their first grandchild, a grandson they named Owen after his grandfather. And Owen the elder was utterly undone by the tiny person who bore his name. Sarah eventually married too, though not until she was 23 and fully ready, to a man who worked breaking horses for the army and understood her need for independence and space. They settled near Fort Collins, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough that Sarah had her own life. James did become a teacher, moving to Denver to attend college and then returning to Greeley to teach at the growing school system. He boarded in town during the week, but came home most weekends, and he never married, content with his books and his students and his family. Elizabeth, the baby, grew into a spirited young woman who wanted to see the world beyond Colorado. She took a job with the railroad company doing administrative work, and she traveled, sending letters home full of descriptions of places Owen and Daisy had never seen. But she always came home for Christmas and spent summers at the ranch, and they knew that no matter how far she wandered, a part of her would always belong there. Owen and Daisy grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down but their love as strong as ever. They handed more and more of the ranch operations over to Thomas, who ran it with the same dedication and care his father had shown, and they allowed themselves to simply enjoy the fruits of the life they had built. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch, with food and music and what felt like half of Greeley in attendance. Owen danced with Daisy under the stars, their grandchildren running around their feet, and he thought about that terrified cowboy who had called out to a stranger walking toward death, and about the woman who had stopped, who had turned around, who had chosen life. "What are you smiling about?" Daisy asked, her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Owen said. "How one moment of bravery, of caring about a stranger, gave me everything I ever wanted." "It gave us both everything," Daisy corrected gently. "We saved each other, Owen. That is what made this work. Not that you rescued me, but that we both chose to build something together, to love each other through all of it." "You are right," Owen agreed. "As usual." Daisy laughed and swatted his chest playfully, and they continued to dance as their family celebrated around them, as their life spread out in all directions in the form of children and grandchildren, and the legacy they had built together. When Owen was 60, he took ill one winter with pneumonia. For a terrifying few weeks, Daisy thought she might lose him, and she spent every moment at his bedside, holding his hand and talking to him, willing him to fight to stay with her. The children came, gathering around their father, and Owen pulled through, stubborn and determined not to leave his family yet. As he recovered, Daisy rarely left his side. She helped him walk when he was strong enough, fed him soup when he was not, and read to him for hours, her voice a constant comforting presence. Owen held her hand and thanked God for giving him more time, for letting him love this woman for just a little longer. He recovered fully, though it took months, and by the time spring arrived he was back on his feet, back to his old self, though perhaps a little slower, a little more aware of his mortality. But he had survived, and he and Daisy were given more years together, years they did not take for granted. They made a habit of going back to the cliff every year on the anniversary of the day they met. It became a ritual, a way of honoring how far they had come, of remembering what they had almost lost. They would stand at the edge and look out at the canyon, and they would hold hands and be grateful. "Do you think we would have been happy?" Daisy asked one year during one of these visits. "If we had met under different circumstances, if I had not been broken and you had not needed to save me?" Owen thought about that carefully. "I think we would have found each other somehow," he said. "Maybe not in the same way, maybe not as dramatically, but I think we were meant to be together. The circumstances just made us appreciate it more, made us fight harder for it." "I think so too," Daisy agreed. "I think you were always supposed to be my reason, Owen. My reason to stay, to live, to love." "And you were mine," Owen said simply. "You gave me purpose and joy and a family I never dreamed I would have. You made everything better." They stood there as the sun set over the canyon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and they held each other close and were grateful for every moment, every day, every year they had been given together. Owen lived to see his 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. He died peacefully in his sleep one night with Daisy beside him, and his last words were to tell her that he loved her, that he had loved her from the moment he saw her walking toward that cliff, and he would love her beyond death and into whatever came after. Daisy mourned him deeply, but without the emptiness that had consumed her so many years ago. She had loved Owen Lancaster with her whole heart for over 40 years, and while his loss left a hole in her life, it did not break her. She had children to support her, grandchildren to hug her, great-grandchildren to make her smile. She had a life full of love and meaning, and while she missed her husband every single day, she was not lost without him. She lived another 8 years after Owen's death, staying in the ranch house surrounded by family, spending her days working in her garden and reading and spoiling the youngest generation. She told stories about their grandfather, about the man who had saved her life, and then spent every day afterward making that life worth living. When Daisy died at the age of 76, it was in the same bed where Owen had died, and her children liked to think that she had gone to find him, that they were together again, wherever souls went after the body gave out. They buried her next to Owen in the cemetery in Greeley, under a headstone that read "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother," and she was given a reason. Thomas and Anna took over the ranch completely, and they ran it well, and they told their children and grandchildren about Owen and Daisy, about the love story that had started with a cliff edge and a voice calling out through the emptiness. The story became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that one moment of compassion could change everything, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that there was always a reason to hold on, to keep going, to choose life. The ranch stayed in the family for decades, through depressions and wars and all the changes that time brought, and every generation knew the story of their great-great-grandparents, knew about the cowboy who called out a name and the woman who stopped walking toward death and turned instead toward life. And in the end, that was their legacy. Not just the land or the family or the love they had shared, but the proof that even in our darkest moments, there can be light. That sometimes all it takes is one person caring enough to call out, to reach out, to offer a hand and a reason to keep going. That love is not just found but built, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Owen Lancaster had seen a stranger walking toward death, and he had called out, not knowing her name, not knowing if she would stop, knowing only that he had to try. And Daisy Warren had heard her name in the voice of a stranger, and something in her, some small spark not yet extinguished, had responded. She had stopped. She had turned around. She had chosen to live. And from that single choice, from that one moment of connection between two souls who needed each other more than they knew, an entire life had bloomed. A love that lasted decades, a family that spread across generations, a legacy of compassion and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up even when everything felt hopeless. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before a decision, in the moment when everything hangs in the balance, there is always a choice. To walk forward into darkness or to turn back toward the light, to give up or to hold on. To believe that it is over or to trust that it might just be beginning. Owen and Daisy had made their choices that day at the cliff, and those choices had changed everything. They had built a life together that was more beautiful and full and meaningful than either of them had ever imagined possible. They had loved deeply and truly, had weathered storms and celebrated joys, had created something that would outlast them both. And perhaps that is what love is in the end. Not just the feeling, though that matters. Not just the passion, though that has its place. But the choice to stay, to build, to give someone a reason when they have none left of their own. The choice to call out into the void and hope that someone hears you. The choice to stop at the edge and turn around and see what life might offer if you give it one more chance. Owen Lancaster had been a cowboy in Colorado in the year 1878, and he had seen a woman walking toward death, and he had called out to her. He had given her his name and his time and eventually his heart. He had given her reasons to live, hundreds and thousands of them, one for each day they spent together. And Daisy Warren had been lost and broken and empty, and she had heard a stranger call her name, and she had stopped. She had turned around. She had taken the hand that was offered, and she had chosen life. And then she had spent the rest of her days being grateful for that choice, for that moment, for the man who had cared enough about a stranger to call out through the emptiness. Their story was not perfect. There were hard times and sad times and moments of doubt and fear. But there was also joy and laughter and love beyond measure, and in the end, that was what mattered. They had found each other at exactly the right moment when both of them needed saving, when both of them needed a reason. And they had saved each other, not just once but every day for the rest of their lives, with small kindnesses and large gestures and everything in between. With morning coffee and evening conversations and the simple act of choosing each other, over and over again, through all the years they were given. The cliff still stood outside Greeley, unchanged by time, and sometimes members of the Lancaster family would go there to remember, to honor the place where it all began. They would stand at the edge and look out at the canyon, and think about the woman who had walked toward death and the cowboy who had called her back. They would think about love and choice and the power of one moment to change everything. And if the wind was right, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear it. A voice calling out across the years, rough with desperation and hope and a care that transcended understanding. A voice calling a name, any name, the right name, pulling someone back from the edge and into a life worth living. That was where it started, at a cliff edge in Colorado in 1878, with empty eyes and a deliberate walk toward ending. With a cowboy on a horse who saw a stranger in trouble and could not look away. With a voice calling out and a choice being made and two lives intersecting in exactly the way they needed to. And from that beginning, everything else followed. Love and marriage and children and grandchildren, and a life so full and rich and meaningful that it was hard to remember a time when it did not exist. A life that proved, beyond any doubt, that there is always a reason to stay, to fight, to hold on. Because sometimes, on an ordinary day when you least expect it, someone will call your name. They will see you when you feel invisible. They will care when you feel abandoned. They will offer you a reason when you have none left of your own. And if you are very lucky, if you are very brave, you will stop. You will turn around. You will take the hand being offered and you will step back from the edge and into whatever comes next. Owen and Daisy had been lucky and brave, and they had found each other, and they had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before. Their story was proof that it was possible, that even from the darkest beginning could come the brightest future, that love could heal and hope could sustain and life could be so very worth living. That was their gift to each other and to everyone who came after them. The knowledge that we are not alone in our darkest moments, that there are people who will call out to us, who will give us reasons to stay, who will love us back to wholeness. And the responsibility to be that person for someone else, to call out when we see someone struggling, to offer a hand and a reason and a reminder that life is precious and worth fighting for. The sun rose and set over the Colorado plains, year after year, decade after decade, and the Lancaster ranch remained, a testament to two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of the world, that story echoed on, a reminder and a promise and a reason to keep going, no matter how dark things might seem, because there is always a reason. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you of it, to call your name and pull you back from the edge and show you what life can be when you give it a chance. Owen and Daisy had given each other that chance, and everything that followed was a testament to the power of compassion and choice and love. They had lived well and loved deeply and left behind a family that understood the value of both. And if that was not a happy ending, if that was not a life well lived, then nothing was. They had found their reason in each other, and they had made every moment count, and in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. The story of the cowboy and the woman at the cliff became part of Colorado history, whispered about in town and passed down through generations, changing slightly with each retelling, but always maintaining its essential truth. That love can save us. That compassion matters. That one moment, one choice, one voice calling out in the darkness can change absolutely everything. Owen Lancaster and Daisy Warren had proved that beyond any doubt, and their legacy lived on long after they were gone, in the family they built and the love they shared and the reminder that there is always a reason to choose life over death, hope over despair, love over emptiness. And that reason, more often than not, is standing right in front of us, if only we have the courage to see it, to reach for it, to let it pull us back from whatever edge we are standing on and into the beautiful, messy, wonderful experience of being alive and being loved and being exactly where we are meant to be.